So, 2020, wow. Hey, did you realize that this was the 60th anniversary of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho? It's kind of amazing we haven't heard anything about it, especially considering all the elements in Psycho that you could see easily upsetting the psyches of the cancel culture. It's kind of amazing that it hasn't been canceled yet. In the same year that Warner Media pulled Gone with the Wind from HBO Max in order to add a trigger warning to denounce one of the most celebrated movies of all time, meaning every Civil War themed movie or even history book faces potential censorship. Meanwhile, a trigger warning has also been added to a mostly innocent romantic comedy from 1943, while mainstream networks have begun to literally cancel, every police-themed series on television, all while Variety is calling for the canceling of Forrest Gump. Come on, let's go take a drive.
One, please.
Good show.
Who cares what I think?
Moonjumper here, and welcome to Who Cares What I Think About the 2020 Apocalypse. Actually, maybe you should care, and you might want to go ahead and hit that subscribe button, notification bell there, because folks, I warned you this was about to happen. That radicals would hijack a legitimate national crisis, and here we are, as we watch in real time statues of George Washington toppled and set ablaze. Major Hollywood studios, institutions of art and free expression that have been with us for over 110 years are now in the process of voluntarily gathering the contents of their own historical film vaults and tossing them onto the book-burning bonfire. And I never intended for this to be a political channel. I don't want it to be a political channel. I'd prefer to avoid politics like the plague. I'd much prefer to talk about subjects like film and television, art and literature. If I'm talking politics, I want it to be in reference to whatever statement an artist, writer, filmmaker was trying to make at the time. I have degrees, certifications, and professional experience in multiple disciplines of the arts and social sciences. That is not to brag like I am some kind of big shot. I am far from it, but I just want you to understand that these are the things that I am passionate about. These are the very things that are under attack now. Free speech, free expression, freedom to learn. One of our nation's and the world's greatest fallen heroes, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., is rolling over and crying in his grave. How can I just sit back and remain silent, even if it costs me my career? Because what career can I possibly have in these areas if they no longer exist? Hey, Hollywood, what careers are you going to have when everything you produce is canceled? Are you hoping maybe the Bolsheviks will spare you? Maybe they'll let you make propaganda films for the Ministry of Truth? Or have you become such true believers yourself that you are happy and thrilled to throw a match into your own film vaults and close the door? What are you doing? Because here's a newsflash, Hollywood. You can virtue signal all day long. You can preemptively cancel your own shows and movies trying to appease these nut jobs, and it won't matter. They do not care about you. But you know who does? I do. We do. Millions and millions of average, regular folks out here, not living on Twitter, not rampaging through the streets, but going about our average daily lives. We love you. We care about you. We care about 100 years of film and television heritage that is a part of our literary identity. Hollywood, even when you piss us off, and you piss us off all the time, you love to wag your virtuous fingers at us, regular folks out here, we're not going to burn down your studio. If anything, we will stand with you. And we're the ones who actually tend to buy the tickets and pay the cable bill and streaming bill and buy the Blu-rays and DVDs. You're not making any money off these morons burning down or destroying a black woman's business who, God bless her, spent her whole life working to build.
You said Black Lives Matter. Why don't you choke me? I'm black. Look what you did to my store.
To say nothing, well, because we're not allowed to mention the multiple innocent people, the multiple African Americans who have been murdered by these rioters. That's the bandwagon you want to be on? That is social justice?
All I know is my son he got killed up there, and he's just a 19-year-old. No, that's Horace Lorenzo Anderson. That's my son, and I loved him, and that was my son.
Back in part 2 of the Panic Pandemic, go watch it. I didn't get everything right, but I got most of it right. I warned you there would be people who would hijack a legitimate national crisis for their own evil ends, and here we are. First, we were all under house arrest. Now we're ducking Molotov cocktails as the Bolshevik mob rampages through our streets on a global scale, intent on burning down all aspects of not just Western civilization, but civilization. Yes, of course, we were all horrified and mad as hell watching a human being murdered on camera. I couldn't have been more angry because I care about humanity. But you know something? I don't think Abraham Lincoln or Winston Churchill or Mahatma Gandhi had anything to do with that travesty. Do you? Do you honestly think that that asshole who murdered George Floyd did it because he was radicalized watching Gone with the Wind? Are you serious, Hollywood? Folks, we're not just talking about Confederate statues, something a lot of good and well-meaning people might be inclined to look the other way. Now, personally, I oppose the censoring of any history. I would prefer we seek to understand it, warts and all. Jump back a couple of thousand years. They called him Alexander the Great because he was a great conqueror, but he wasn't a nice guy. He was brutal. He had slaves. Genghis Khan, incredible conqueror, incredible tactician, but not a nice guy. Brutal beyond imagining. But I would never suggest ripping down Alexander or Genghis Khan statues or removing them from history. We need their history to understand ourselves. But instead, we're creating a situation in which historians will be discouraged from speaking or writing candidly. No historian or screenwriter should ever be made afraid to examine a soldier, maybe a young boy, who happened to wear a gray uniform because Alabama was his home. That's all he ever knew. A scholar should not be made afraid to examine him as a human being rather than simply a cartoon villain in a dark era that seems almost incomprehensible to us in modern hindsight. Was he fighting for the wrong cause on the wrong side of history? Of course. We all understand that. We all agree with that. The pragmatic question is, born when and where he was by pure happenstance, did he understand that? And in this particular case, maybe he did. If you read this young soldier's heartbreaking letter right here on the screen, he appears to be questioning that very thing. He's gravely ill, and in those days, soldiers were just as likely or more so to die of disease as to die in battle. He's gravely ill, not wanting anything else than to see his young wife and children again, and doubting he ever will, and probably didn't. And in the midst of that letter, he is openly questioning if this fight for the Confederacy is worth it. He's not so sure that it is, and he just wants to go home. Historians, writers, museum curators are now going to be afraid to examine those dark times candidly, pragmatically, with any sense of nuance. And if you think that can't happen, if you think it's just Antifa and some bandwagon politicians ripping down statues, well, the politicians will tell you, well, we're going to put them in a museum. What museum? No museum will dare take them. No historian or curator will dare touch them. Museums are now removing statues and exhibitions, and it's not just Confederate statues, it's Teddy Roosevelt, a progressive museums. We're talking about George Washington, we're talking about Thomas Jefferson, Ulysses S. Grant, Abraham Lincoln, Winston Churchill, folks, Mahatma Gandhi statues are under threat. From radicals who seek to purge free society and replace it with something very grim and dystopian, quite the opposite of Gandhi or Dr. King. When it comes to tossing 100+ years of film and television onto the bonfire of books, art, and literature, it is not stopping with Gone with the Wind. It is not stopping with Paw Patrol and every cop-related show on television. Folks, listen. Variety, the standard bearer of entertainment trade magazines, has released a list of films that it wants canceled. And it's not just mean old Dirty Harry. Variety is demanding the canceling of Forrest Gump. You cannot make this up. A film about a physically and mentally challenged man overcoming all odds and succeeding. Hollywood itself wants to cancel Forrest Gump. And studio CEOs are buckling like cowards, taking their own century-old and irreplaceable film and TV catalogs and tossing them onto the bonfire, making them unavailable to us all, maybe permanently. Don't fall for this, oh well, they're just going to put some trigger warning on them, no big deal. Yes, we at Variety, who used to oppose censorship, we're not saying that these films should be outright banned. We're just unilaterally taking it upon ourselves to compile a list of some of the most popular movies ever made, including Forrest Gump, which no one was complaining about, and dictate to you an angry list of reasons why you should be offended by them, or at least ashamed of yourself for enjoying them. We, the enlightened, are simply calling for a warning label. That's it, nothing more. No, that is step one. And that is mostly for the titles they know people will actually notice are missing. Like Gone with the Wind or Forrest Gump. How many hundreds, thousands of lesser-known but classic works will just quietly disappear? Who's gonna care if some old 1930s film reels are dumped into a furnace behind Warner Brothers? No one will notice, right? But it's when the rage-filled radicals are fully in power and ruling with a Stalinist fist. That's when they'll finally get rid of the big stuff. Because who's going to oppose them if you don't put your foot down now and say no to cancel culture? Consumers should say no, and especially the people running these studios damn well should say no. No, we are not going to surrender the heritage of this studio to a bunch of spoiled adult children who refuse to grow up. But I'll tell you what, let me offer the studios some benefit of the doubt. Surely there are some people still left in Hollywood. I mean, they can't all be wild-eyed activists who hate their own profession and want to be filtered and censored. Somewhere in the offices of Disney, Warner Brothers, Universal, Sony, aka Columbia, MGM, Paramount, aka Viacom CBS, among these century-old institutions, surely there must still be some rational people still working there who entered the business because they love the art of film, because they love the art of television drama and comedy. People who don't want their own art to be censored, let alone the art of their beloved forebears. Not to mention the pragmatic need to make money off these things. It is a business and it is their profession. Here's a hypothetical example. I'm just making this up. Let's say, hypothetically, I can't buy the 60th anniversary Blu-ray of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho because you yanked it off the market just because it offends some troll on Twitter who's never seen it and isn't going to, maybe until he finally grows up. But I and a whole lot of other people who love that film were trying to give you our money when you yanked it from Amazon, pulled it from every streaming service, and went on to CNN with a tearful apology for the classic film's very existence. Oh, wait, what are you talking about? It's Alfred Hitchcock. It's a celebrated masterpiece. What's the issue? Well, Norman Bates, he's clearly a misogynist. He hates women. He kills women. It's so sexist. We apologize for this outdated blight on our studio, and we'll make sure it's never available to offend Twitter ever again. Benefit of the doubt, I assume somewhere in the hierarchy of these legacy studios, there are still rational people who realize that this is nuts. Norman Bates level nuts. So assuming there are still rational people in Hollywood who believe in the free market of free expression, then sure, I could understand their desire to maybe reach some kind of compromise. Maybe Twitter will leave us alone and let us keep our film catalog if we just add a trigger warning to these films they consider problematic. Something like, this film contains outdated depictions of social attitudes that we condemn, blah blah blah. Well, who cares what I think when Twitter is the only barometer that seems to matter? But I'm triggered by a trigger warning. I'm offended by that trigger warning. Where's the trigger warning for the trigger warning? No, okay, let's be serious. On Sunday night, I was watching a classic black and white film on the Movies TV network called The Crystal Ball from 1943. Now, if you know your history, that was 2 years after Pearl Harbor, the height of World War II, in which we were fighting for our very existence on no less than 3 fronts: Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy across the Atlantic, and Imperial Japan across the Pacific. The same Imperial Japan that attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, and drew us, the United States, into the war. Now, this was a romantic comedy set in New York, nothing directly related to the war itself. It's about a Texas girl trying to make it in the Big Apple who kind of gets involved with a group of female con artists, almost a borderline heist film, but primarily a romantic comedy. Her mark ends up being the love interest, of course, who likewise is engaged to a wealthy socialite. A little love triangle that has to be overcome with all kinds of comedic hijinks. So again, nothing to do with the war at all other than some references that acknowledge that the war was going on. For example, being a Texas girl, she knows how to shoot a gun, and there's a little carnival-type firing range next to her apartment where she enjoys shooting. And of course, she always outshoots the boyfriend. If you look at it honestly, with an open mind, it's kind of an early feminist film. Well, they're shooting at targets which happen to be not so polite, not so PC cartoon caricatures of Mussolini, Hitler, we're not even allowed to say his name these days, and the Japanese emperor, complete with the racist, oversized teeth, unnatural characteristics. It is racist. There's no getting around that. I cringe a little. It is uncomfortable because I have a love and affinity for Japan. My living room is full of Japanese art that has been given to me as gifts by my Japanese friends, and I treasure them. So maybe out of the entire hour-and-a-half long movie, that was about maybe 5 seconds of screen time that were, for me, unpleasant. But I am intellectually intelligent enough to understand the context of the time 77 years ago when we were at war with Japan, after Japan attacked the United States, resulting in over 3,000 deaths and injuries at Pearl Harbor alone. Suffice to say, Imperial Japan, like Nazi Germany, was not all that well liked at the time. And guess what? They didn't like us either. They were trying to wipe us out and conquer us. It was a different time. today Japan is one of our greatest allies. But here's the thing, even though I might retroactively cringe at a 77-year-old caricature of the Japanese emperor with whom we were at war, it's not as though Japanese propaganda was all that polite towards us, and why would they be? It was war, and folks, can we be honest? The Japanese in general are not known for being PC. If you're a lover of Japanese anime and manga, then you know it's not particularly PC, and they surely don't care about Americans being offended on their behalf. In fact, right now, Japan is watching and is extremely concerned about this cancel culture madness happening in the US, Canada, and Europe. Here's some breaking news from Crunchyroll. On the same week that Disney is pulling episodes of The Golden Girls from Hulu, and Netflix is pulling episodes of Japanese anime series from its platform, the Japanese government is conducting the equivalent of a House or Senate hearing on the imperiled future of Japanese anime and manga, hearing from the artists themselves. Let's read. Love Hina manga creator, Love Hina is the name of manga. Love Hina manga creator discusses manga's freedom of expression with Japanese government. Love Hina manga creator Ken Akamatsu sent out a tweet on June 29th, and no, I can't read that, but here's the translation. This month, I was invited to participate in a House of Counselors witness questioning session, but instead a member of the Diet, the Japanese government, asked me, what measures are needed for Japanese manga to survive in this world? I replied, first and foremost, freedom of expression. Compared to other countries, he's talking about us folks, compared to other countries, Japan's forte is its freedom of creativity. In other words, American creators are not being allowed that same freedom. He says, however, with foreign platforms becoming more and more dominant, I would like to avoid a situation where Japanese works are regulated by foreign standards. Foreign standards. That's a very polite way of saying white SJWs in the United States and Europe demanding the censorship of artists of color from Japan. What is wrong with this picture? Now, let's jump back to the crystal ball for a minute. One more thing that I'm sure helped garner it a safe space trigger warning, and something that was frankly quite innocent, such as our heroine posing as a gypsy fortune teller and using a fake stereotypical accent. And you know something? I'm sorry, it was funny, okay? Completely harmless. It's comedy. Get over it. Japan is over it. Japan is not worried about a romantic comedy from 1943 with an ugly caricature in it, and your trigger warning does not make Japan feel all warm and fuzzy. On the contrary, they are worried about your trigger warnings. They are having legislative hearings about your trigger warnings. Japan is worried about American cancel culture censoring them. But after that horrible atrocity that took place in Minneapolis, which a romantic comedy from 1943 or Gone with the Wind from 1939 had nothing to do with, but Warner Media felt the need to add a trigger warning to Gone with the Wind, and the Movies TV network had to add a trigger warning to The Crystal Ball, which I all but guarantee that cop has never seen. I think it's kind of insulting to the memory of George Floyd, or at best frivolous, for Hollywood to insert itself by canceling an 80-year-old movie thinking that's somehow going to do anything to improve police training and or vetting. Mr. Floyd is not dead because an obscure 77-year-old romantic comedy has a World War II era not-so-PC caricature in it. George Floyd is dead, his life and constitutional liberty taken from him because a corrupt city government in Minneapolis did nothing to vet or investigate a man, Derek Chauvin, who was known by his own department to be abusive, allegedly. And oh, by the way, probably knew his victim, George Floyd. While it's still not clear how well Chauvin and Floyd knew each other, you had a co-worker who told CBS News that, yeah, they actually had a beef with each other, but then he walked that back. Regardless, it is a fact, not a conspiracy theory, but a verifiable fact reported on by mainstream news sources, however begrudgingly, that yes, these two men, Derek Chauvin and George Floyd, both worked security at the same Minneapolis nightclub, El Nuevo Rodeo, which has since been burned to the ground, so no one's collecting any evidence from there. But the club's owner, Maya Santamaria herself, verified that yes, she had hired both men, that Chauvin worked security outside the club and George Floyd worked inside the club, and both on Tuesday nights, although she couldn't verify just how many interactions the two had actually had with one another, but that she did perceive Chauvin to have some racist tendencies. This, at the very least, is an amazing coincidence that is being largely ignored, but not ignored by the family of George Floyd, who wants it investigated as possible grounds for first-degree murder. But they'll have to sift through the ashes of that club to find any evidence. Hollywood slapping a trigger warning on a 1943 romantic comedy does not solve that kind of pure criminal and political corruption. All that trigger warning is doing is insulting the intelligence of your target demographic. You know, people who watch romantic comedies from 1943 have probably heard of World War II, statistically speaking. And furthermore, you're basically shaming your audience from watching it. I mean, that'll make you some money. Or God help them if they dare watch it and admit to enjoying it. That might get them fired. I mean, that's practically where we're at now. Well, go ahead and fire me, because I enjoyed the hell out of The Crystal Ball. It was a damn funny movie. But here's the tragedy of the whole thing. The reason I am the target demographic of these old classic films, and I'm not that old of a guy. I mean, I'm Gen X. I'm in my 40s. But you know, 1943, Gone with the Wind, 1939, Psycho, 1960. Okay, that is way before my time. I don't love these movies because I identify with that time period. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, but I am able to see past myself. I'm able to see past my own lifetime and my own experience. I can watch a movie or television show from decades before I was born and still get it. I can laugh at the humor. I can cry over the drama.
Where shall I go? What shall I do?
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
But the cancel culture crowd, they don't even want to try because they have been conditioned to be afraid of it. And so here we are. I mean, my God, half of them have college degrees, and yet they literally do not know about World War II. They literally do not know about the Founding Fathers or the differences between Grant and Lee. They literally do not know that Mahatma Gandhi was an anti-colonial progressive dedicated to peaceful protests. As of this morning, I'm recording this on July 2nd, 2 days before the 4th of July, that most Americans still like to celebrate, but not this year because a lot of cities have decided to cancel those evil celebrations. The cancel culture mob has succeeded in intimidating the mayor of Columbus, Ohio, to take down an enormous, already vandalized statue of Christopher Columbus, whose primary crime, and you can argue what a terrible evil person he was all of a sudden, but his primary crime was defying the scientific consensus that said it couldn't be done, and crossed a vast perilous ocean in 3 tiny primitive boats that should have ended up on the bottom of a turbulent sea, and discovered America. That's his crime. Discovering America, or technically rediscovering it after the Vikings had centuries before. In fact, you want a fascinating historical read? Read the Vinland sagas written in medieval times, telling their tales of the New World. Their interactions with Native Americans, which by their account from the Norse perspective were overwhelmingly peaceful. There was some conflict, not every tribe liked them being there, and that's understandable, but they did their damnedest to maintain peaceful relations with Native American tribes through diplomacy and trade, because they couldn't afford to do otherwise. They were vastly outnumbered, isolated, no supply line, and they weren't all axe-wielding warriors. They were colonists. They talked about establishing legal court systems to settle lawsuits between colonists, and they weren't all Norse. Some others came along. I recall a Celtic couple, a husband and wife team. They were both botanists. They were essentially contracted to come along to determine what plants were safe for the Norse colonists to eat. We're talking over 1,000 years ago. One of the most fascinating things I have ever read. However, in the end, it was essentially a failed experiment because they were so isolated. They were unable to establish a lasting foothold in the New World beyond Iceland. It was Columbus 500-600 years later who effectively opened the Americas to Europe, and that is his crime. The fact that I and most of you listening are here breathing half a millennia later with apparently no statute of limitations is Christopher Columbus's crime. Even though I don't see any of these privileged white Antifa kids surrounding that Columbus statue volunteering to go back to Europe. But they do expect Columbus, Ohio to change its name. They do expect Hollywood to pull any movie about Columbus ever made. I guess CBS is going to have to pull episodes of Star Trek Enterprise that featured the Enterprise's sister ship, the Starship Columbia, which happens to be commanded by a female Hispanic captain.
This is Captain Hernandez. Request permission to depart.
You're cleared for departure.
The History Channel is naturally going to have to pull all episodes of one of its biggest franchises, the Vikings. Hollywood, listen, you cannot cower to ignorance, because the more you cower, the more you retreat, the more emboldened the mob will become until the Constitution is shredded and you will not be allowed to broadcast or stream that movie. You will be out of business. You have to push back on it. You have to say enough. Our history is our history. Deal with it. Learn from it. People who love film, people who love television, art, music, do not want to be dictated what they are allowed to enjoy. Why don't you ignore Twitter? Stand up to the bullies. Listen to your actual customers who know that a film is literature. A film is history. A film is a part of who we are, no matter how flawed. And we are all flawed because we are all human. And those films and television series which are a part of who we are also have a tendency to hold up a mirror to who we are at any given time in history and illustrate where we did need to improve and where we still need to improve today. If you allow yourself to be bullied into censoring the past and censoring yourself, you are betraying yourself. History cannot be a safe space because history is history. And if you censor history, if you erase history so that we cannot learn from history, then God help us when the future actually arrives. What future will it be? It won't be a utopia. And now let me switch audiences here. If you are one of those young men or women who have been conditioned to despise and fear everything beyond your own experience, I implore you, please, for your own well-being, open your mind. Experience what you don't understand. Experience what you fear and learn from it. Learn about it. Become truly woke, as you like to say, because what you are calling woke is the opposite of woke, or being awake, or being enlightened. It is the state of a closed mind. Cancel culture is a cancer upon a liberal democracy. And it is no way to live, especially for those who are doing the canceling. Because you're not just denying us, the menacing us who you so vilify. You are first and foremost denying yourself knowledge. But who cares what I think? From deep in the heart of Texas, I am Moonjumper. Please like, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below while being kind to one another, even if you disagree. And less selfishly, I ask for your prayers. Pray for this nation, pray for those who have been killed and their families, and pray for freedom, peace, and peaceful justice. Coming up next time, I hope, tentatively, let's try and get away from politics. I would like to again be exploring our classic TV heritage with a look at OTA networks H&I and Antenna TV, and then later in the weeks ahead, I will finally deliver what I promised way back in episode 1 of Who Cares What I Think, an in-depth analysis of Star Trek Discovery versus Star Trek Picard. And then sometime after that, I have a review of Siberia 3, the video game, and Man from Atlantis. I hope you'll join me. Until then, stay safe, and see y'all next time.